Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As we all know, information manipulation and interference has grown more sophisticated and hard to detect over the years. The situation is expected to grow more challenging as new technologies like AI are used not only to create more realistic misinformation, but also to undermine existing guardrails. In many cases, information manipulation and interference can and has led to real-world harms. The bottom line is this: if we already find it difficult to distinguish between what is real and what is not in times of peace, how much more challenging will it be in times of uncertainty? So to help us answer these questions and look at the challenges, we have Dr. Akin, who will talk to us about how intra-European networks contribute to information manipulation and interference. Dr. Janjira, who will discuss the role of domestic actors in such activities in the Southeast Asian context. And finally, Major Serafin, who will focus on use cases from the Russia-Ukraine war. Let me now invite Dr. Akin to commence his presentation. Thank you.
I'll use this. Okay. Well, thank you very much for this wonderful event and for allowing me to do a presentation on the European Union's framework for countering information manipulation and interference. And I'm the coordinator of a large European Union grant called one of the Horizon Europe projects. Horizon Europe projects are large consortium projects that are intended to, solve a big EU problem. And in this context, our consortium is about solving the EU's information manipulation and interference problem. So the presentation is about one of the research questions of our consortium's work. And the project starts with the question of, can you shoot with words? Which may sound like a silly kind of question, but the concept of the idea of using information as a form of warfare is deeply ingrained in the concept of FIMI, foreign information manipulation and interference. So it is essentially considered as a form of warfare in which you don't actually shoot at people, but nonetheless it aims to destabilize nations. It aims to confuse and divert the decision-making and policy-making capacities of nations. And different than disinformation, the idea of FIMI, or foreign information manipulation and interference, also considers factually accurate information, but changed in perspective, changed in context. Even accurate information can lead to destabilizing nations and interfering in electoral processes. And the FIMI framework actually originated in the European External Action Service, part of the European Commission. But over the last 2 years, this FIMI framework became adopted not just by EU countries, but also by the US State Department. There's a framework to counter foreign state information manipulation. Canada has adopted this framework as well. I know that Japan and South Korea are also involved in this European FIMI framework as well for Southeast Asia. I'm sure there are talks between Singapore and the European Union as well on this context. But the aim, at least until the election of Donald Trump, the aim was to build an EU defense shield against foreign information manipulation. And this framework has created new indexes, new ways of measuring information manipulation. And there are quite a lot of war analogies in this. So is information manipulation a form of warfare? Is it a war tactic? The concept seems to build the framework as such. So there are strategies and tactics, just in traditional warfare. It involves strategic planning and the use of tactics to achieve certain war objectives. There are offensive operations and defensive operations. You attack in information space, you defend in information space. There's a notion of a target. You either attack electoral processes or NGOs or certain companies in order to confuse and manipulate, information manipulation. And it has an impact on society, politics, and governance, as well as military processes. In Ukraine, we're experiencing it, quite significantly. In other war zones in the world, we see the weaponization of information deliberately as a war tactic. And there are concepts such as kill chain or the disarm framework. So these are concepts that are used to, the disarm framework is an open source framework for fighting disinformation. When we say FIMI, it's not just a word, it's not just a new concept. It involves a way of interlinked ways of measuring and interlinked ways of categorizing information manipulation. And when we say FIMI, we specifically mention, one, the disarm framework. They have a GitHub page, they have an openly available website. It's a framework in which both the EU, United States, and Canada are kind of right now using to categorize and measure FIMI incidents. OpenCTI is a cybersecurity incident and logging interface, and STIX2. This is a little bit technical, but just to give you an idea that when we say FIMI, we are actually talking about these three concepts primarily. How to categorize FIMI events, how to measure FIMI events, and how to build actors and actions in the FIMI framework. And it's highly technical, highly detailed. You can go up to their individual websites. These all three frameworks, have websites. You can go to the Disarm website, OpenCTI website, and STIX website. But when we say FIMI framework, we're actually talking about a highly technical, overly academic to some people, and a highly scientific way of referring to specific, information manipulation actions and different, very highly specific ways of coding FIMI incidents in the planning phase, in the preparation phase, in the execution phase, and the assessment phase. So my project is called Detecting and Countering Information Suppression from a Transnational Perspective. In the EU framework, you have to shorten them into an acronym, and our acronym of all that stuff is called the Deconspirator. Don't ask me how we came up with this idea. It's an AI-generated acronym. You basically copy and paste your abstract into an AI-based, interface. It reads your abstract and suggests some acronym. So this was AI-generated. I can't really take credit. But practically, our project combines 13 EU countries and partner countries. We have 15 universities and research labs and think tanks across Europe. We have Turkey, we have Georgia, we have Bulgaria, Italy, Spain, Netherlands, Belgium. We have fantastic researchers in the project. And we're practically trying to understand foreign information manipulation and interference from the perpetrator side. We realize that there's not much work in trying to understand why external actors do FIMI in the way that they do FIMI. So we go into the archival, the archives of specifically Russia and China, but then we're going to expand this FIMI framework into other kind of attacker countries as well, defined by the EU. We're interested in building a new FIMI data set, which will allow us to compare, for example, whether FIMI incidents in Portugal are worse during election periods compared to Latvia, for example. We're interested in building a large-scale Europe-wide survey to understand subnational and region-wide variances in being vulnerable to FIMI. And psychometric assessments. We're interested in micro-level, human-level drivers of what makes certain people more vulnerable to FIMI compared to others. So I would like to go more deeply into our research questions. This is basically our consortium. But I'd like to here talk about our origin research question. And, I was told that this audience will be a combination of academics, civil society, and government. And apologies if this is like too scientific or too technical in nature. The first paper that we are trying to create out of this project is a game theoretical model of information warfare. So we're interested in the question. Yes, we know there is foreign information manipulation. But so far, our study in Europe led us to the realization that no foreign interference can succeed without domestic support. So in any country, including Turkey, my country, or in any European country, I don't really know Southeast Asia, so maybe we can do in the quick question and answer whether it's the case here as well. But no foreign power can actually come in and destabilize your nation's information space without any kind of domestic support from your own nation. These can be, trolls and bots. These can be certain political parties. These can be certain NGOs, certain media groups, certain interest groups, certain business groups who actually have an interest in helping foreign information manipulation succeed in your own country. And this led to a second follow-up question. Why would domestic actors help foreign information manipulation? Why wouldn't you defend your country against foreign manipulation? What are the incentives? So in order to understand this, we started to approach this from a rational actor model perspective, which means basically that there are some payoffs, there are some incentives in some domestic actors to share and disseminate foreign information manipulation in country. So for example, just to give you an idea from Turkey, Turkish information space, for example, is extremely disinformation laden. There's incredible amounts of disinformation in Turkey. And it is a very highly culture-specific and political context-specific type of disinformation. It is very difficult for an outside actor to just come into the Turkish information space and do successful disinformation because they will not be able to catch the content, they will not be able to catch the political meaning as good as domestic actors will do. So most of the time, when we looked at the information space, we saw foreign actors engaging with domestic actors in order to catch that political context and domestic, cultural context. So the question then becomes, what do domestic actors gain out of spreading foreign information manipulation? And this led us to building right now a very rudimentary model of information warfare. We are basically building this warfare by doing reverse engineering of FIMI incidents that are considered to be major and very important. So we're taking case by case by case, dividing them into subcomponents of attacker, defender, their objectives in each FIMI incident, their tactics in each FIMI incident, what kind of actions the attacker undertook in order to destabilize the defender, what kind of actions the defender took in order to be able to defend against foreign manipulation. And we import quite significantly from the rational actor model of the cybersecurity literature, which covered a lot of ground in the last decade regarding doing this game theoretical modeling of cybersecurity, attacker, defender as well. So we value this literature quite a lot. And so when starting with attacker and defender in kind of this information warfare space, so who are the attackers? At least in European External Action Service lexicon, state actors, who are interested in destabilizing certain nations. There are non-state actors such as hacker groups, such as media companies that are building trolls and bots. The defenders are democratic governments, international organizations like NATO, EU, OECD, and private sector entities and civil society NGOs. So we have this space in which there are attackers, there are specific defenders. From here on out, it's going to be technical, but I'm going to explain the rationale behind these formulas. You don't have to understand the formulas, but basically, the attacker always has a short-term advantage. So an attacker attacks. By the way, do I end in 15 minutes and do Q&A for 5 minutes, or is those 20 minutes all for me?
20 minutes all for you.
Okay, perfect, wonderful. So the attacker's payoff is always short-term, because the attacker is always going to be debunked, fact-checked at some point. So the payoff of the attacker is always short-term because it's going to be debunked. And when it is going to be debunked, it is going to be named and shamed. It is going to be defined as a country or an actor that has this information. But attackers still engage in foreign information manipulation regardless, because they know that even though they're going to be debunked later on, the payoff that they are searching for is short-term. And the defender, in order to be able to debunk and fact-check attacker as fast as possible, they have to allocate resources to the act of fact-checking. So in an information space in which you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of forms of information manipulation, the defender has to channel their resources into the most problematic few. As in cybersecurity, the number of attacks are enormous, and so the defender has to specify which specific attack it has to deal with. So the payoffs attacking to EEAS lexicon is that the attacker, when they do successful influence operations, they gain certain political outcomes. So they either manipulate an election or shift public opinion. They have some economic gains out of this. They can disrupt markets. And especially in Southeast Asia, I think this is a huge payoff for any attacker, where financial markets and trading markets can be very vulnerable to foreign information manipulation, and otherwise weaken adversaries by eroding public trust. Now, defenders, on the other hand, have the interest of maintaining integrity of democratic processes, enhanced national security, and maintaining public trust and stability. So both of those probabilities of success are depending on how much infrastructure and investments that go into an information attack and an information defense. Now, in international relations, we have this concept of international anarchy. There is no overarching international body to defend countries, so countries have to defend themselves, in which this is called an international, anarchic system. Everyone has to defend their own, and it's the same thing for the information space. In information space, there is no international body that is going to defend countries against information manipulation. So all countries have to defend themselves, which means that in information space, there's a distinct attacker's advantage. If you are an attacker, you gain the opening momentum, and the defender has to take some time until they have to understand what you're trying to do and start to defend. So this means in the short term, they have distraction and demobilization advantages. There are strategic payoffs. Now, the defender in this context have an advantage of increasing the costs of disinformation for the attacker. And we call this reputational costs. You, as an attacker, if you are engaged in too much disinformation and it becomes obvious and explicit that you're engaging in so much disinformation, you are then faced with reputational penalties. Later on, along the way, the more information actions you do, the less international audiences are going to trust you. And in the anarchic information environment, we have lack of deterrence, we have first mover advantage, and preventive action becomes the norm in this context. Now, with this, we have the following questions we haven't yet been able to answer, but this is right now still the first year of the project. So I'm just going to run through some of our core puzzles. One, even though attackers always get debunked and they always suffer from reputational penalties, they still engage in disinformation. Why? Either because the reputational costs are not significant enough or they don't get debunked early, we don't know. But this ex post inefficiency of disinformation on why do countries engage in disinformation even though they know that their ex ante gains from it often dwarf in contrast to their ex post reputational costs, meaning that they still want those short-term gains even though in the long term they will suffer from reputational penalties. Two, the problem of attribution. So in cybersecurity, attribution is a huge thing. Attribution means who did this? Who attacked my country in cyberspace? The same thing goes for information manipulation. It's very hard to attribute, and when you cannot attribute, you can't properly defend. First, how do you deter an information action that you cannot attribute over the short term? Three, do successful attacks and defenses increase the aggressiveness of actors in the next round? So in the first round, the attacker becomes successful. Does it generate more aggressiveness in the next round? Or if the defender is more successful, does it increase the likelihood of more aggressive attack in the long run? So 4, how do we define a successful signal in information warfare? Signal in this context, meaning I am able to defend or I am able to attack successfully. Without actually engaging in information warfare, how do we signal our ability to properly defend and properly attack? So with these questions, I'm going to finalize and finish my presentation. And if you have any answers to all of this, I'm just introducing the questions, but happy to hear your thoughts on these questions. This is what our project is dealing with right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Janjira, up to you.
How do I switch to my slide?
You have to do my presentation.
Okay. Oh, there you go. Okay, thank you. Morning, everyone. So what I'm going to share with you today is based on a couple of projects I've involved in. And these projects looked into the role of influence actors or influence operation actors in different countries in Southeast Asia, starting from Thailand, where I'm from, and then we are now expanding the project to analyze 4 Southeast Asian countries, including Thailand still, but also Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And so we started off the project by looking at the domestic context of influence operations, trying to understand how these actors are funded, how do they operate, and what do they want. So pretty much basically domestic politics that we wanted to initially understand. But as we went on, delve deeper into our projects, what we realized that across these different countries, there's one common theme that is emerging, and that is the use of geopolitical conflict narratives in these domestic campaigns. And so today I want to touch upon that part of the project a bit, and offering some explanations as to why local actors in these 4 Southeast Asian countries are interested in using geopolitical conflict narratives in their domestic campaigns. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is nicely built on what the keynote speaker, Graham Brookie, sort of discussed this morning, the way that he sort of argued that foreign manipulation of information cannot be successful if there's no local support. And I think Akin, Professor Akin just sort of built on that discussion as well. So my research focuses rather on information manipulation, not interference just yet. So we frame information manipulation or influence operations as large-scale covert efforts by foreign actors to sway public opinions, strategically disseminate disinformation, and manipulate behaviors in targeted country. Right. So whenever we hear debates on FIO, the normal assumption, the usual assumption is drawn on high-profile events like the US elections in 2016 or 2020 or just recent election, or a Brexit referendum, or elections in the EU countries where right-wing parties have gained momentum, right? But I think what we tend to get out of these current debates is that it is as if foreign actors come into a specific country and impose a narrative on that country. But I want to argue that the reality is actually much, much more complex. Local actors actively shape the characteristics and impact of FIOs. And so my ongoing research sort of delves into this aspect. The question as to how these guys use or spread geopolitical conflict narratives is still ongoing. So today I just focus on the why question. In many ways, sort of building on Akin has just said. Now, before going into the detail of why these guys are using geopolitical conflict narratives, I just want to give an overview, a brief overview, comparative sort of analysis of the landscape of cyber troops or influence actors in the 4 countries we are focusing on. So just briefly speaking, on this spectrum, you have countries where state actors play a prominent role in influence operations. And this country is, for example, Thailand, where the army has been involved in influence operations for a long time, both online and offline, and Vietnam is something along this line as well. So influence operations in countries where state actors heavily involved in the campaigns are quite institutionalized. And towards the left, I think, no, this is left, yes. The left end of the spectrum is more or less the role of private actors in these campaigns. And these are, for example, PR companies hired by political actors to engage in influence operations. Between that, you have the role of political parties that sort of are part of the employees of these PR companies. So the countries as we study are sort of in these 3 sort of positions of the spectrum. And we sort of delve into the hierarchy of actors, architects of the campaigns, the budget allocated to them, and the context in which they are active. Now, let us have a look at the reasons why local actors incorporate geopolitical conflict narratives in their campaigns. First and foremost is financial narratives. In countries like the Philippines, where the industry of online influence has flourished, domestic influencers and trolls for hire can be financially motivated to promote pro-China and sometimes pro-Russia narratives. I just give you one example. After the Philippine government successfully challenged China's territorial claims in the South China or West Philippine Sea through the ICJ in 2016, China basically rejected this ruling, as we all recall. By 2018, pro-China fan pages on Facebook were pushing the narratives in support of Beijing's refusal of the ICJ's ruling. Now, these pages represent a network of Chinese actors, including pseudo think tank, like allegedly the Integrated Development Studies Institute or IDSI, social media personalities, I will give you one example later, media outlets such as allegedly again the Manila Times and Sunshine Media Network International, and association. Together, these actors form a pro-China ecosystem where geopolitical articles and opinions are published in allied outlets and amplified across different networks. Reports indicate that Beijing-funded outlets recruited local journalists and those who are financially struggling. So let me remind you again, of course, there's footprint of foreign actors everywhere, but again, local actors are financially motivated to take part in this. Now, and this is a different group of interest groups, the business elites that are taking part in this kind of ecosystem. Of course, they have what the Philippine media called independency relationship with China when it comes to having Chinese influence in the countries. Now, the second reason, and I think most importantly in my opinion, is that domestic IO actors leverage geopolitical narratives for domestic power struggles, be it during elections, policy shifts, and mass mobilization efforts. And so within this kind of category of reason, these actors have employed an age-old tactic of stigmatization. So basically, when you look at narratives of domestic actors incorporating geopolitical narratives, what you will find is the accusation of the opposition as foreign agent, of the media as foreign agent, of NGOs as Western puppets, right? And so I'll give you one example again, going back to the Philippines. Where during the Duterte, the former presidency, influence actors endorsed Rodrigo Duterte's domestic and foreign policies, including the war on drugs and his pivot to China. And these sort of change in foreign policy during the Duterte administration diverged significantly from the country's traditional alliance with the United States. And to do that, to mobilize domestic support for something that is so counterintuitive for the Filipinos, the government needs to rely on its own influencers and ecosystem of higher trolls. And these accounts, pro-Duterte accounts, join forces with pro-China actors to frame Duterte's pivot to China as a move promoting regional peace and independence from the US as a former colonial power, while attacking critics at the same time. Now, I think I have 9 minutes and a half. I just try to be a bit faster. Jumping to another example of Thailand, where this kind of geopolitical narratives employed by local actors are quite prominent during election campaigns and the suppression of mass protest movements. So in Thailand, geopolitical contestations involving the US, China, and Russia have become tools for coordinated pro-establishment campaigns to discredit the opposition party and suppress dissent. So since the 2014 military coup that was heavily criticized by the US and the EU countries, the Thai political elites have increasingly endorsed anti-US attitudes and adopted pro-China, pro-Russia sentiment. So initially, these coordinated fan pages would frame Western criticism as foreign interference and to plot, and as a plot to undermine the Thai monarchy. This narrative gained momentum during the youth-led protests in 20 and 21, with pro-establishment accounts and mainstream media alike accusing protesters of being backed by the West, and calling for them to be arrested as traitors. Now, during the election last year, the same rhetoric was devised. The Thai pro-establishment influencers and outlets accused the opposition party Move Forward, which was disbanded in August this year, of receiving funding from the US, basically, specifically the CIA. And again, you know, this George Soros has become a label that stigmatizes civil society dissidents accused of receiving George Soros money. You know, Move Forward, the opposition party, was accused of receiving funding from the CIA, and this was seen as a part of a broader effort to consolidate US hegemony in Southeast Asia. Now, last third reason, and this is just preliminary sort of speculation of what could be drivers for these local actors, so please feel free to add more later on during the Q&A. Your comments and feedback is most welcome. Now, last but not least, I think that we've talked a lot about sort of tangible gains, right? That these local actors would get out of using geopolitical conflict narratives, othering the opposition, basically smearing candidates in the election. But I think the last reason is ideological, and this doesn't mean that these actors are not after material gains, but they are also driven ideologically to engage in geopolitical information campaigns. So these actors find anti-West narratives promoted by foreign influencers appealing because they resonate with shared sentiments about the West's declining legitimacy. In most Southeast Asian countries that are formerly colonized either by European powers or the United States, political elites and segments of the population embrace nationalism rooted in the myths of sovereignty and skepticism towards Western imperialism. So this sentiment grew stronger after the US-led war on terror and amidst ongoing support for Israel's war in Gaza. And this kind of, you know, resentment against the West-led liberal order is quite prominent, particularly in Muslim-majority countries like Malaysia and Indonesia. The narratives of Western hypocrisy in the region aligns well with Russia's standard accusations that the West exploits human rights and democracy as a facade to entrench its global dominance. Kremlin-backed online propaganda has tapped into this kind of local discontent by portraying solidarity with Muslim victims of Western imperialism despite Russia's own crackdown on Muslim minorities. This message has resonated well with netizens in Malaysia and Indonesia, many of whom view Russia as an alternative superpower that is standing up against the West. So rather than in the discourse of Ukraine, in the context of Ukraine-Russia conflict narrative, the influence operations promoted by these actors frame Ukraine as not as a victim of Russian aggression, but rather as someone who provoked the war in the first place. So similarly in Thailand, the pro-establishment fan pages portray Ukraine as a historical part of Russia, framing the war in Russia as a defense of its sovereignty. Again, Thailand is this country that was historically officially not colonized, and therefore the elites are jealously safeguarding the country's sovereignty, and therefore this kind of campaigns tap into this the jealousy of sovereignty, tap into that and rework that message and basically reframe it as Russia's defense of its own sovereignty, which is a bit twisting when it comes to the whole reality that's happening in the global stage. Now, I would argue that this kind of local discontent with the US-led global order fuels this kind of what we call online participatory propaganda. So you have, on the one hand, orchestrated propaganda, right, by domestic and foreign actors, but later, if the propagandas kind of are appealing to domestic discontent, then netizens participate in this kind of propaganda dissemination. Lastly, I just want to take stock of the research we're doing and sort of offer some 2 cents as to why local actors employ and engage in geopolitical conflict narratives. And I want to say that as much as foreign states orchestrate influence operations, local actors actively exploit these campaigns for their own purposes, be it economic, political, or ideological. Analysis sounding alarms about the dangers of foreign influence operations often overlook these on-the-ground dynamics. And so two points, 2 takeaways that I want to offer is, number 1, we should be cautious about conflating the proliferation of foreign influence operations with its impact. The existence of these campaigns doesn't automatically translate into its impact, and I think the previous 2 speakers have emphasized this point as well. Secondly, to assess the foreign influence operations impact, one would need to take into account, number 1, a pre-existing ecosystem of local influence operations. And as I said, our research delved into this whole domestic market and industry of influence operations. Number 2, domestic conditions that make the population receptive to foreign influence operation narratives. And third, local support or opposition to great power policies. Thank you.